All right, welcome everybody to the Utility Security Podcast. We're joined with Bill Edwards, who, readers of the magazine might be familiar with. He was a cover story in one of our issues in 2024, talking all about the threats that drones and UAS are causing to utilities. So, welcome, Bill. Can you tell the folks a little bit about yourself?
Curtis, thanks. Thanks for having me back. Always great to be on this forum. So appreciate the offer to discuss the evolution of small drones, which to me is one of the hottest technology topics, probably paralleling with what we're seeing in AI and the development of AI and machine language learning and others. But yeah, all good. Now, just continuing to offer drone security, safety, and emergency preparedness courses to the market. It's going, very well recently, and in working a lot with different organizations, DoD, U.S. government entities, but also critical infrastructure, and helping our professionals in that field, in that market space, to protect what's important to us from a day-to-day perspective. So, yeah, I'm ready. Let's get into it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, and yeah, that's why we're super excited to have you do this podcast with us, because as I've been out attending utility security events across the country and talking to readers and talking to experts, that one of the top topics that keeps on coming up is the drone threat. So I'm so happy that we'll be able to talk a little bit more in depth about what's happening and what the future may hold in terms of protecting vital critical infrastructure. I want to start off by talking a little bit about the wars that are pressing on around the world. Ukraine seems to be at the top of the list when we think about how drones are being modified and used to do some pretty devastating damage in war zone areas. And I know you mentioned the article. That is something that can transfer across. Once something is created, it goes out on the internet and lives forever. But I wanted to ask you now, as kind of an update, what sort of trends are you seeing that are concerning to you as the evolution of drone modification, drone technology is happening in war zones?
Yeah, I mean, I think one, it's a great question, because we have to, as security, safety, emergency preparedness professionals, we must be keeping our eyes on all the different trends that are happening outside of the U.S. And inside the U.S. But obviously, with these conflict zones that are hot right now, you're seeing really the and I've said this before, but you're seeing the really biggest laboratories in the world taking shape before our eyes, with all these multiple experiments taking place around small drones and the use of small drones. In those conflict zones, those techniques, those tactics, and those procedures are actually coming out, and they're openly available in social media and multiple platforms. So, to me, the drone, or the increasing drone threat, is obvious. But I'd say some of the things that are critical to answer your question is, one, we're seeing greater expertise with just maneuvering, flying, employing small drones. So we're seeing that expertise level grow quite a bit. It's gravitating towards younger people, obviously, who like technology, who are into those types of tools. And one of those tools is obviously, flying in what's called first-person view mode, which is where you're in goggles or a helmet, and you're able to, virtually be on the drone as it flies. So you're flying almost essentially like it's almost like a video game in many senses. The other part of what's interesting is actually the maturity in the small drone itself, and how the technologies associated with those drones are just getting better every day. And I like to say, I might have even said it in the article, but this isn't a technology that matures over years. This is a technology that matures in weeks and months, and it's evolving that fast. And I think when you look specifically at the drone itself and the components of the drone, so think in terms of the motors, the propellers, the onboard computing, the flight control command, etc. All those parts and pieces, the frame itself, are maturing, becoming better, becoming faster, can carry heavier payloads, etc. So I think look at the evolution of the drone itself, and the components that make up that drone are pretty important. And then lastly is the trend of drones that are flying without a detectable signature. So if you think about that, we like to say that's a drone that's flying in dark mode, or flying without really emitting a signal. And this technology is continuing to evolve, which is most concerning from a detection perspective, because as we all know, if you can detect the drone, then you can potentially mitigate it if it's determined to be a threat. But obviously, from a current law perspective, that mitigation authority is retained at the federal level of our government. So there's a lot of work to be done there as well. But detecting, tracking, and identifying is also becoming more challenging. It's always been a challenging operation, but it's more challenging, I think, as the technology evolves.
I want to build upon that a little bit because you're talking about the evolution of the technology. Detection is an issue. What are there other sort of? I mean, you kind of went through a list there, but maybe you can go into a little bit more detail about how these evolutions are impacting security. You mentioned detection as one area. There are other sort of enhancements that are going to make the job more challenging of protecting critical infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, detection, regardless of what anyone says, detection is a hard operation to accomplish. So you have to have the right technologies layered together. I like to say, if you're going to try to detect a small drone, and remember, we're talking about drones that are in the categories of 1 and 2, so drones that are 55 pounds or less, when they're categorized in that manner at takeoff with payload. And so these are small drones. They fly fast. They're maneuverable. Their precision, especially precision capability, is amazing with first-person view. But mostly they fly on radio frequency signals. But there are other ways to program or fly these platforms so that they're not emitting that signal. And then when you talk about drone detection, normally what is ideal, and especially for a critical infrastructure facility, if you're looking at this, it's important to look at what's called a layer sensor package. And to me, the four major components of that are a radio frequency sensor, obviously a radar, because radar is your active sensor in this package, which really allows you to detect drones that aren't emitting a signal. So radar is pretty critical. And then, of course, optical, which are high fidelity cameras. And then, of course, acoustic is always an option as well. But the elements have to be pretty advantageous to picking up the drone sound if you're going to employ acoustic sensors, which is totally possible as well. But again, remember when I talked about the component evolution, the drones are also becoming more quiet as they fly. So there's really quite a bit of what I would call the action reaction or cat and mouse game that's going on with this ecosystem as it pertains to the drone itself, and then of course trying to detect and mitigate that platform.
Okay. On that note, I wanted to ask you a question about a quote I heard recently. I was at a security event and watched a security leader for a large utility get up on stage and give a presentation. And he was asked specifically what his strategy was around drones. And, I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but his answer was nothing. Why should I spend money on something I can't do anything about? I'd rather invest funds in those areas where I can actually do something. And that gets into something you said a little bit earlier, the mitigation is restricted to the federal level. So, I just want to kind of get your response on that, kind of paraphrase quote, what your thoughts are. Is
Yeah.
he on the right page or not?
Well, look, I hope he's listening. There's plenty of things you can do to prepare your facility with really what I would call at a low cost, no cost options, at least at this point. When we talk about federal legislation on this specific topic and ecosystem and technology, there is a lot of work to be done at the governmental levels. And we just saw a recent executive order come out by the current administration, which I think is really going to drive some of this in further down the road to help us out. So I can talk about that in a few minutes. But I think for that person that made that statement, one is you can do really, I think there's 5 things you can do at this point. And I've personally worked with critical infrastructure facilities to help them develop what I call the air domain security in their holistic security programs. So all of these facilities have a security program. It's focused around certain things that are customized to their environment. But what we know now is that the air domain affects every piece of critical infrastructure. It affects mass gathering venues. It affects sensitive sites in the United States. It affects military facilities, or could have effects, I guess is the right word. And so I would start with really this training methodology that I built, which is, first educate the C-suite and the senior executives on what the ecosystem is all about, and then how you can actually start thinking about creating the air domain program inside of your security program. So the second item I would mention is that there's an introduction to small UAS, which are drones and platforms, is really a holistic look at what is the drone, how is the drone comprised, and then of course the technologies, the counter unmanned aerial system technologies, and then current federal law would comprise that first foundational training course. Once those 2 foundations are established, then you can get into actually building what I call a drone vulnerability risk assessment for your facility. You can start crafting your drone emergency response planning, taking into account your internal and your external stakeholders, and bringing that collaborative group together in order to have a proactive response to a potential event. And then the last phase of this methodology, I call it left of drone launch. It's sometimes referred to as prior to launch, but that's your operationalization of your drone program. So that's where you start to do proactive things to try to mitigate the risk of a drone event at your facility. And so really, if you think about it, it's educating, setting foundations, establishing a drone vulnerability risk assessment, building your emergency response plan, which also includes policy and procedure, and then, of course, setting the conditions for your standard operating procedures at your facility, for really looking out beyond your facility and then sort of taking a concentric circle look towards the center of how you would think about the drone problem, and potentially how you could craft your operations to actually be proactive. And so it's really, to say we can do nothing, I think is not true, but you can do some proactive things now to set conditions for when federal and state and local legislation starts to change and adapt to the needs of our critical infrastructure facilities, mass gathering facilities, sensitive sites, et cetera, which I think is coming based on what we're seeing from the current EO. So I think, I hope you're on, whoever that was, but, please reach out to me and we can have that discussion.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about those executive orders. Those were signed recently by the president, and from a standpoint of utilities looking to guard their critical infrastructure from drone attacks, um, when I read it, it sounds like it might move the needle. I'm not sure. I wanted to kind of get your input as a subject matter expert on what your thoughts are on those orders.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great step forward. I mean, I took out of the EO, there's plenty of information to digest when you read the specific one on protecting critical infrastructure, but there's 7 points I'll make. So the first is it addresses protecting critical infrastructure, mass gathering venues, military sites, and sensitive sites. Number one, that's great. It also recommends the establishment of a federal task force to sort of bring this all around, tie a bow on it, bring it together as a collaborative effort. It also talks about restricting drone flights over critical infrastructure. So that's another step forward. Obviously, it's not directing mitigation at this point, but it's still starting to set those conditions for protection. The other couple comments that I took out of it, or the statements I think are important, are establishing a grant program for our state, local, territorial, and tribal law enforcement agencies, so our SLTT, which is really great because that shows a trend of thinking about delegating authority down to the next level of government. And then, of course, ideally, what I would love to see is delegation of authority down to the operators themselves, as long as they're trained and certified on how to conduct these missions. The fifth point is it gives guidance for critical infrastructure owners on what's called detect, track, and identify drones in the airspace. So DTI is the acronym, detect, track, identify. And so it gives guidance for CI owners on that topic, or it establishes a way forward on that. It also considers designating federal facilities, critical infrastructure, military installations, and as covered facilities under what's known as what we call in the market as laws 124N and 130I, which are the authorities to detect and mitigate drone threats. So, not to confuse the audience here, but there are some federal code that this falls under, this whole ecosystem falls under. There are some authority mechanisms under 124N for federal entities and 130I for military entities. And you see a lot of this. There's some hearings that take place quite a bit on actually designating military facilities as covered under 130I, which then would give their leaders more of an opportunity to detect, track, and potentially interdict drones that are considered a threat. So that's the sixth point. And then the seventh point, which I think is really important, is establishing or creating this national training center around the technologies, which I think is a great idea. And that would then support this delegation of authority to detect, track, and interdict down to lower levels, SLTT, potentially, critical mass gathering, critical infrastructure venue operators. So you can see how I think they're thinking about it. But based on the EO, I think those are really great 7 points. There was another one that came out in the same day on June the 6th about drones themselves and manufacturing in the U.S. So that's also another, I think, great step forward. But this is good progress.
Oh, that's really good to hear. I mean, I'm just kind of from your personal opinion, because I know you've been tracking and you've been involved and you've been pretty instrumental in trying to get the legal system to change, revolving around this threat. With this recent motion via executive order, do you feel more confident that we're moving quicker in the right direction, at least? Or
Yeah, I mean,
there's a lot more to go?
Yeah, I think we are. I mean, this is a great step forward. We're seeing the federal legislation actually pick up. We've seen Senators Cotton, Senators Lee, and some of the others on the Senate side actually submitting bills, or what we call introducing bills to the Congress, to the current 119th Congress. So that list is starting to grow as it pertains to CUS or counter UAS operations from a federal law perspective. So the efforts of our legislators, along with what the EO is saying, is starting to create, I think, the synergy and the momentum that is going to be helpful down the road.
Excellent. That's good to hear. Yeah. Going in the right direction is always good, especially with the threat as nefarious as this one can be. You've covered on this topic a little bit already in some of the prior questions, but I wanted to get to ask you anyway to maybe expand upon maybe some areas you didn't cover. But I just want you to envision being a leader at a utility right now in charge of creating a security program or security for the drone threat. Outside of some of the things you already have referenced, what are some things that utilities should be thinking about doing, and other areas that might be proactive, whether it's through, actual security implementation or above and beyond getting regulations and laws to change and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, all of the above. The biggest issue is that a lot of people have this view that this technology ecosystem is so complex and so hard to figure out that they it's almost it causes them to pause and think, okay, I don't think I can take this on. But really, the number one thing is just a complete lack of education, I mean, holistically, of what this ecosystem is about. Once you understand those foundations, and I like to teach it in a manner that takes the complex and makes it simple to understand. And so once you understand those foundations, then as a security professional, if I'm running one of these facilities, I start to think about, okay, what are my no cost, low cost options for risk mitigation? How am I substantiating my thoughts on the air domain as a threat, or the small drone as a threat, into my security program? So then it becomes part of the documented security program. That's where you start your drone vulnerability risk assessment. And then at that point, you can start then memorializing your policy, your procedure, and then how are you going to actually, mitigate risk to your facility, your operation, your venue, whatever it may be. As long, I think, as you're consciously addressing your duty of care responsibility as a security or safety emergency preparedness professional, it's really, what you can do at this point. So if someone says we can't do anything, not true. There's a lot we can do in preparation for setting the right conditions, and that's super important. The other piece and I've been talking about this recently, is because the drone itself is maturing very fast. The ability to for that drone to be precision is getting better and better and better every day, especially with this ability from a first-person view perspective. So that type of education needs to be understood as well. So when you're thinking about, if I'm putting myself in the security professional's role here, I'm thinking about how do I mitigate that risk at my facility for my critical assets. So again, it goes back to, I have to do my assessment to identify what is critical to my facility, and then determine what the vulnerability is to that critical asset and the consequence, obviously, if it's destroyed or doesn't work. And then how do I mitigate that risk? There's many ways to do it, low cost, no cost. But I can tell you, we just, not too long ago, I trained very large water utility and power utility. And we helped them establish that drone assessment program at their largest water distribution facility in the state. And so now inculcated into that security program, which, includes perimeter detection, access control, camera visualization from security cameras. Now they have included the air domain into their program.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. I mean, that's good to hear, organizations are being so proactive and trying to address that, and to hear that the solutions don't have to be complicated and expensive. It sounds like lots of easier, low cost ways of being ready and
Well,
doing what you can.
yeah, initially that's what I'm trying to set here is the foundations, but as you roll into what I would call the capital investment, which is really your technology purchasing, right? Where you purchase technology. The capital investment, if you do all these things in the right manner, you can make an informed decision on what technology you do need to buy. Therefore, you're supporting your own return on investment because you understand the technology, you understand what you need. And so that capital investment then does turn out to have some return on investment from a security and safety and emergency preparedness perspective. But the problem I'm seeing, to answer your question from earlier, is there's such a lack of education that, if you're educated first, then you can make that informed decision later.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. Couple more questions before we wrap up. Uh, I know I've asked you this question probably a couple times last year, but I want to ask again. It's the crystal ball question. I look into the future with everything we've talked about, with the advancement of technologies, changes in regulations, and what utilities need to do, and protecting their critical infrastructure. What do you see in the future? Are you optimistic, pessimistic? Where does the technology evolve to? Are we going to see a shift in the ways we can better secure our critical infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, look, these platforms, this ecosystem is starting to rely heavily on the advancements of AI, autonomy, machine learning. And so yeah, I think it's almost like a parallel. You could even see it as a parallel maturity in technologies as the drone itself and the detection capabilities themselves start to again increase capability and maturity. Then you also um, you see this evolution of AI and autonomy and machine learning taking place as well. But they're coming together and they're converging. And so we have to be thinking in those terms of how that capability is actually changing. But also, I'm completely optimistic about where we're headed as long as we're informing our decision makers at the right levels, and we're getting our security professionals trained and certified. We'll be on the right path to being able to address this new threat. Really, frankly, this small drone air domain threat has changed legacy physical security. If you're a physical security professional, you've been thinking about access control, perimeter detection. You're talking about, and think about, a few years ago, we really went after protecting our facilities from hostile vehicle mitigation. And so a lot of bollard work was done, a lot of protective measures, and that's great. But physical security now includes a different domain. It includes an air threat. And so we've got to track how this technology is maturing and then start to think about how we mitigate the risk. Remember, it all goes back to do your drone vulnerability risk assessment, identify your critical assets, identify the threat, critical assets, vulnerabilities, consequence, and then how do you mitigate risk? Start with low cost, no cost options, and then inform yourself to actually make that capital investment. I think as far as detection goes, a critical piece of technology is obviously radar. So you want to, do your homework on radar as well.
Wow. Yeah, I love how you brought up the 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 car thing and how much we had to shift and change, and how drones are just that next version of that. Really fantastic. And I want to thank you for your time today. I mean, fantastic expert on this topic. I love always love the opportunity to share your knowledge with our listeners and readers. But before we go, I just want to give you kind of the stage to tell our utility security listeners and readers how they can get in touch with you and learn about what you can do to help them with their drone security.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thanks again for the opportunity. Always love being on your show. Here, and to me, why I like this so much is because critical infrastructure holistically is very important to me. Mass gathering events in our country are very important to me because that's where we take our families, our friends, our coworkers to have fun, to enjoy events. Um, Protecting our sensitive sites, protecting our military installations. Again, I'm retired from the Army. That's an important thing that we need to think about and do as well, especially with the ability of this technology that just continues to fascinate me in its growth. In like I said, weeks and months of time. The program I mentioned that I do offer to the market it's a training program about the ecosystem. It really sets the foundations for understanding where to take your security program itself to the next level, specifically addressing the air domain. The best way to reach out to me is through email. It's just bill.edwards@phoenix6consulting.com. And you can hit me up on email. I'm glad to send any material that you would like to read and see more about it. One thing I will tell you is the courses that I do offer are certified by ACES International for continuing professional education credits, and that's always important if you're trying to maintain a certification. So we've gotten these courses validated through ACES, and they provide the CPEs for taking the course. So. And I'm always appreciative of that organization as well. So I think that's it. So bill.edwards@phoenix6consulting.com, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Bill. Yeah, reach out to him if you got questions about what you can do to and be ready and prepare yourself for better air domain security, which is the new layer that everybody is tasked with now. And again, thank you, Bill. And thank you to everybody listening in today. Hope you all stay safe and secure out there.